Welcome to the CommunicationDiva podcast, episode 3. Today's podcast is a feature interview with Don Tebbutt, a real estate agent with over 30 years' experience in the Vancouver area. Jen Swanson interviewed Don at a local franchise of Tim Hortons Donuts, a Canadian cultural institution and home of the famous Double Double coffee. Greater Vancouver has the most expensive real estate in Canada, so grab yourself a cup of mediocre coffee and a Boston cream. I think Don's buying for everyone.
Hi everyone, this is Jen Swanson. Welcome back to CommunicationDiva, and I'm excited today because I have a friend with me, Don Tebbutt, who is a real estate agent, and I just want to say thanks for being on.
Well, thanks for having me, Jen, and I'm looking forward to the little interview.
Great. So I have a few questions here, and if we think up some more as we go along, that's just fine. My first question to you is, what brought you into this line of work, and how long have you been doing this?
What brought me in is a really good question. I had an uncle that was a salesperson and ended up in real estate. I kind of talked to him. I'm a welder fabricator by trade. Did that for 6 or 7 years, and it was pretty dirty, pretty smoky. And I had to punch a clock, and I had a boss to answer to. So I kind of looked at what he was doing, talked to him, found out that I didn't have a boss, and thought maybe that might be a good way to go. That was in 1979 that I made that decision. I've been in the business, licensed as a realtor since the 80s, since 1980. And it's true, I don't have a boss, but I think I work at least twice as hard as when I had a boss.
I bet. One of the reasons I wanted to interview you is that I'm interested in how communication skills have come into play in your line of work and what kinds of things you might have learned over the many years of experience. And I'm just right now, I'm sure it's lots, but if one thing stands out for you right now, what do you think that would be?
Oh, boy. One thing?
Or something.
One thing out of 32 years, let me tell you. Well, along the lines of communication, and there's so much to discuss there, and the changes that have taken place. But I think it was a real learning curve for me, something that my dear uncle came by honestly, or at least developed long before I was aware of it. But it's probably listening to what people are saying. But beyond that, it's not just listening. When you listen, you've got to... They talk about reading between the lines. You got to kind of listen between the lines as well, and how things are delivered. So listening, I think, and listening between the lines would be the most important.
Right. So watching what they're doing with their body also while you're asking them the questions or they're saying. Do you like this house? Oh yeah, it's okay.
Well, one of the interesting things that I've learned is that the more a person goes on about how much they like the house, the least likely they are to purchase it.
Really?
It's quite interesting. People that get very interested in a property quite frequently start tearing it apart and looking for the defects and the tiniest little things. And sometimes when they start getting into the tiniest little details, that's a big clue. Now we're listening between the lines. Now we know that they're really interested. All the big stuff is handled. It's these little minor objections that seem to be getting in their way.
So they're interested in that, or you say when they rip it apart, that's when they're interested?
Typically, not necessarily every time, but yes, if they really like the house, if it feels right for them, they'll start looking in the corners to find little things that, it's almost like a defense mechanism for them. They don't want to be too eager. They don't want to jump in and commit. So they'll start looking at the little things. And this is frequently a sign that they are very interested in that property.
So you're watching and you're listening between the lines. That's great. For some people, I think buying or selling a house can be really stressful. I know when I've done it, it's felt that way sometimes. And people are dealing with a lot of emotions and with large sums of money. So how does this affect the way they communicate?
Jen, it is a stressful time. I believe they put it up there in the top 3: death, divorce, and moving. So it is right up there. It involves uprooting families. Maybe it involves a job change. Maybe it involves a city change. It certainly involves an awful lot of money. And typically for you and for me and for most of us, that this is basically our future. It's our retirement plan as well as our home. So there's a great deal of stress involved in it. I think as a realtor, we're frequently called upon to counsel as well, and to not tell people what they should feel or how they should feel, but to at least listen to how they're feeling and to deal with that. It's not a decision based on brick and mortar. It's a decision based on their emotion. How does it suit their family? How does the location suit their family? How will they fit into that location or that neighborhood for that matter? So the stress level is extremely high. Some people deal with it a lot better than others. And that just has to be recognized and acknowledged, I think. And I kind of try and bring that out into the conversation. I don't hide the fact that they're stressed out. And hopefully we can get to the point where we can joke about it even a little bit.
Yeah, I've heard about people actually getting to the point where they're fighting because of some of this stuff. Have you had any experiences with that?
Oh, there's lots of, let's call it bickering between spouses, between family members. I guess one of our biggest concerns is where the parents, the buyers of the home, the ones making the decisions, bring in their 8-year-olds and their 12-year-olds and ask them what they think of it. And that's very nice. We all want to include our children, and we don't want to exclude them from big emotional and changes that are going to affect their lives. But sometimes I think the parents really listen to their kids and maybe base their decision on their children's interests. And of course, the children just aren't developed enough to make that kind of decision, nor do they have the cash input. So that can be a little bit frustrating. But yeah, there's lots of bickering between husbands and wives and even family members, uncles that give advice, and brothers and fathers. And it's quite fascinating, actually.
So sometimes are there too many cooks in the kitchen sort of thing for you?
Everybody's entitled to get as much advice as they like, and we encourage that. At the same time, if I take you out and we look at 6, 10, maybe 12 different properties, and so you've got the comparables in your mind, you've seen the 12 best properties out there that might suit you, and you decide on property A, and then you think, okay, well, I'm going to bring Dad in because he's got lots of experience, and why shouldn't you, particularly if you're a younger person and starting out. So they come in and they're overly protective many times. So they're looking for the faults, and they've got their objections, and they don't have the full picture. They don't have all the data, all the information that you might have after looking at 8, 10, 12 different properties. And then, of course, the kids want to listen to the parents, and that makes sense. But so sometimes we have to fend that off a little bit, and maybe even go back out and show Dad some of the other properties, just so that he's got that same kind of background data that you would have.
Sounds like a bit of a communication navigation process for you.
Well, it can be. And I guess where we maybe fall down the most is not recognizing where the problems are coming from. I mean, let's face it, if the house isn't right for you, it's not right for you. So we're not going to spend any time on that. But if it is a good house, if it's well priced, if it's in a neighborhood that suits you and in your particular time of life and need, then yeah, let's zoom in on it. And if we have to educate the entire family, then that's our job. I mean, if this is the property that fits you, what can I do to get you into it?
Huh. That's fascinating, actually. Have you had to learn or develop specific communication skills? You've talked about listening already, but in order to be effective in some of these what sound like kind of stressful situations, have you had to develop any other types of communication skills?
Communication skills. I don't know how much of it's skills and how much of it's just learning how to use tools. I'll just go back a few years now, like 32 years ago. Just as a for instance, communication has changed so much. Of course, when I started in the business, we didn't have internet. Nobody had personal computers. Very few of us had pagers. We didn't have cell phones. And believe it or not, we didn't have fax machines. So communication was a long, drawn-out, face-to-face, belly-to-belly process. You couldn't communicate with somebody except over the telephone, and on a rare occasion, we actually used like a telegraph to telegram to confirm something if people were that far away, if they're out of town. So over the years, I've had to adjust to pagers. We've had voice pagers and message pagers and just beepers that just beep, then you had to phone in to get a message. We've got cell phones, fax machines, computers. We're emailing, we're tweeting, we're Facebooking, we're whatever. So not only have I had to try and figure out what communication is all about, I have to try and figure out which one of these tools is the best method. Still, nothing replaces a face-to-face talk with somebody where you can actually see what they're thinking, feel what they're thinking. A telephone, still one of the better alternatives. But we get a lot of text messages now and then, or a tweet, and you've got, everything's abbreviated, everything's short form. It's great for factual information and conveying, just minor details back and forth. But you certainly can't, even in an email where you can, develop quite a conversation. It's still not an effective way of true communication. You can get words across, but you're not really communicating on that emotional or even an intellectual level. It's just words.
Yeah, and there's so much more than just words. Have you ever gotten into trouble with communication skills or lack thereof with a client?
Oh, yeah. Stuff happens, they say, and it certainly does. And as much as I guess communicating is listening. I think we talked on that, touched on that earlier, that listening and listening between the lines. The other half of communicating is conveying your thoughts, conveying your information in an effective manner. Now, I can tell you 6 times that this is the costs associated with selling or buying your property. But if you're all wrapped up emotionally in the house, you don't really hear it. So we try and write it down. We try and initial it. We try and make sure that information has been not just conveyed, but conveyed and understood and acknowledged. If people don't acknowledge, they might not understand. And I think this is a very, very important part of communicating, not just in business, between your kids, your spouses. Get an acknowledgement from them. There was a time not that long ago where people sold their house. We negotiated long and hard. We discussed bottom line. We discussed commissions. We discussed legal fees and property purchase taxes and all the different ins and outs of what this was going to cost them. Sold the property, and when the time came for them, they didn't realize that the costs were as high as they were. And we'd gone over them, we'd written them out. Somewhere along the lines, I would have to accept responsibility for the fact that they were short or had less cash left over than they thought they were going to have. It wasn't a great deal, but it was enough that they were very, very upset. And unfortunately, they blamed me, which is fine. You got to blame somebody, I guess. But they blamed me, and we had quite a falling out, and it was unfortunate. And I was prepared to help them out again when they bought something, but they would just as soon not work with me again. So every once in a while, every once in a blue moon, you really fall down on your job, I guess, or I have to accept the responsibility for that.
Yeah. And that's probably true with every kind of a job, I would think. So do you find it's about selling the actual home, or is it more about the relationship then between you and the client? So are you selling the house, or are you selling yourself?
I think when initial introduction is made, I've got to sell myself. I have to let people know that I have some knowledge and experience. They have to get to know me a little bit. They have to have some faith in me. They have to trust me. I think it's really important that they trust their realtor. It's quite a long process. It can be 2 or 3 weeks. It can be a couple of years to actually work with a realtor and get the job done. And if it works out, then they come back to you, and it's a little bit easier the next time. As far as selling a product, the interesting thing about this job, we call it sales. I don't like to think of myself as a salesman. I'd rather think of myself as a facilitator, but we do not have a product. I can sell you any product out there. It's not a brand name thing. I only have 2 or 3 brands to sell. If you go into Sears, they want to sell you a Kenmore. If you go into the Brick, they got 4 or 5 different appliance brands that they can sell you. We can sell anything. So to me, it's much more important that the property fit the buyer, and it's not even a matter so much of selling anything. Sometimes we have to guide. Sometimes we have to illustrate or demonstrate that A, the value is there in that property, B, the property suits them and their lifestyle. And I think we have to take ourselves out of the fact that we're selling anything. We're really not selling. We are providing information. And hopefully it's the right information. It usually is.
Yeah, and there's a lot of detail involved with it from my experience, and as a buyer and a seller, there's a lot to navigate through as far as paper communication goes.
Yes, there is. There's a great deal of paperwork involved, and it's very confusing. I do this day in and day out. You, for instance, might, I don't know, every 5 years, every 8 years, every 10 years, sell a property and buy another one. Some people are in a house. The first house I ever sold, it was out in Abbotsford. The first house I ever sold, it was in 1980, and those people, bless their souls, are still in it. So, sometimes people just don't move a whole lot. So yeah, there's a lot of paperwork, and again, it's a matter of sorting it out and keeping it straight. Now, my job, obviously, as I'm much more accustomed to it than you would be, is to keep everything in order, to make you aware of the order, of what is about to transpire and the process, what the lawyers do, where the taxes go, what the costs are, what your bottom line is going to be, what's your mortgage payment, what's your mortgage payout, if there's a mortgage penalty. I mean, these are all things that we need to keep in mind. So it's my job to organize it all and keep it all nice and neat, and then try and get that across to the buyer or the seller in a form that they can understand, and that it's not that they're silly or stupid, or it's just that they're not accustomed to it. So it's much easier to say, listen, here are the points you must be aware of. the rest of the details, here they are, but don't worry about them. This is what's going to happen. Boom, boom, boom. And I think that gives them a lot of confidence as well. They know what to expect. Some people have to have the details. That's just their nature. That's their makeup. They're more analytical in nature. So that's fine. We'll go over all the details, every little detail along the way. Other people say, I don't want to know. Just when do I move? Okay, what's a completion date? What's a possession date? What happens? What's a subject removal date? So that's fine, so long as we can give them the details and the information that they require. Then all the other little details are taken care of through my office, as far as communicating with the lawyers and that type of thing.
I remember in this last place that the place that I'm in now, I remember having arguments, not arguments, but it came down to the curtain rods. And the woman who was selling the home, for some reason, was very possessive over all of the curtain rods in the house. Is there anything unusual like that you have found over the years that people get stuck on when selling a house?
Just about anything, Jen, just about anything. My advice to most people is if you really, really, really don't want to leave it behind, get rid of it before you start the process. If it's funny, people can spend $200,000, $400,000, $600,000 on a piece of property and worry about a $50 or maybe a $500 fixture or appliance or something that just really means nothing. However, that's on a value scale. On an emotional scale, obviously these things end up having great value, and unfortunately people also develop a bit of a it's kind of a I gotta win attitude, or am I losing something here? And sometimes it boils down to a light fixture or a curtain rod, what have you. It's quite clearly defined in the Real Estate Act what's a fixture and what isn't. So again, it's probably up to us as realtors to address all these issues and say, Jen, how important are those curtain rods? If they're really not that important, maybe we should just forget about them. Curtain rods are not a fixture. Curtain rods are a chattel. So they can go away unless they're specifically mentioned. So again, these are some of the little details that, I mean, in all honesty, despite everything I do and how many times I've done it, sometimes things do get missed. We try not to. Sometimes they do. So tell me, how did that work out? Did you get your curtain rods?
No, I ended up finding out that they were antique curtain rods and they couldn't be replaced, I guess the person figured. So in the end, I thought, this is ridiculous. I'm not going to argue over things to hold up curtains, and I gave in. But it's a little bit of a battle of wills sometimes, I think.
It truly is. Now, I don't know what the monetary value was of those rods, or if you spent more than $50 replacing those curtain rods. But for some reason, if you understand the value, if there is intrinsic value, if it's a wedding gift, if it's an anniversary gift, if it's a gift from your parents that have now passed away, a virtually worthless item becomes very, very valuable. If in this case an antique set of curtain rods that can be replaced for $50 or less, it really isn't worth the battle, but I know sometimes we get caught up in it.
I know. I also wonder too about when we moved in, or when we were looking at the house, there was a cat dish on the floor in the kitchen under the dishwasher. And we found out later that the cat dish was there to catch the leaking seal around the dishwasher. And I kind of felt that the people weren't being very straightforward with the little defects in the house. And I wonder if you've encountered that sort of thing. I'm sure you have.
Well, apparently I have. There are times. We try and catch it all. There is a property condition disclosure statement that people are, as they sell a house, are supposed to fill out, and they're supposed to do it honestly, and it serves as a reminder that are there any little details like that? You would probably have assumed they had a cat, and that probably would have been a pretty safe assumption in most cases. I do write in a clause these days also that tries to cover most of those issues. But again, at the end of the day, if we're spending $300,000 or $500,000 on a property and there's a $30 fix involved, while it is emotional and it's disappointing, it probably, 2-3 years down the road isn't quite the end of the world. We'd like to catch all these things up front, but people are just people, and we're still, as a realtor, we're really not part of the deal. We try and catch everything. And I think for the most part, I really believe that, and my experience has been that most people deal in good faith. Almost all the time, 95% of the time, 98% of the time, we're dealing with just ordinary people. Sometimes they miss something inadvertently, but we do get a little upset when they do it on purpose. And you can frequently tell, as in your instance.
Yeah, well, I don't know, but this, in the end, we ended up going back to the people and saying, excuse me, you need to fix the seal, and they did. So it worked out in the end. But it was kind of thinking afterwards, that's why that cat dish was there. It was a little bit disappointing.
We'll just go back to the stress level again, Jen.
Yeah.
It's an extremely stressful time. And now let's keep in mind that it's extremely stressful for you when you're buying a property and you're moving in. The stress is just as heavy on the poor people that are selling it and moving out. And they've got a deadline and everything goes wrong at the last minute. We try, I think we should try, and eliminate as much of that tension and pressure as possible. But when you're doing something of this magnitude, that's virtually impossible to eliminate it all. So the stress is there. For you, very disappointing. Not a big deal, but very disappointing. You move in. All you want to do is put your bed together and go to sleep. Get the TV going, and you'll deal with the rest of the stuff later. All they want to do is get out of there. They've got a bed to put together someplace else, and the TV to set up and get the coffee pot going for the morning. So they just want to go. We have lots of difficulties around cleanliness. One person's idea of clean isn't necessarily the other person's idea of clean. And a lot of people figure, this is just clean enough. And if you were living there, maybe it would be clean enough. But when it's their dirt, it's not clean enough. If it's your dirt, it's okay. I don't know when the last time you pulled out your refrigerator and cleaned behind it was.
I'm not
I know. I know in my house it was some time ago. So there's your dirt, there's my dirt, and there's their dirt, and again, it's just magnified 1,000-fold by the stress on both sides of the equation.
Yeah. Stress is so powerful. Was communication ever addressed in the training that you took?
I think they told us it was important, but that's probably as far as it went. It's a trial by fire process. Some people get it, some people never get it. And this is an interesting aspect of communication, Jen, is that I have a way of communicating with people. I think it's great, but that's just my opinion. Other realtors that I think are poor communicators or not as proficient as I am, or they just communicate in a different way. Now, the interesting thing is that they find a group of clientele, and that group of clientele, that type of person is attracted to that type of realtor. They wouldn't necessarily want to work with me. They would choose that other realtor over me because they communicate on a different level. And vice versa. Obviously, when I leave town and I leave my work with a colleague, I'm very careful that I pick a colleague that communicates somewhat similarly to the way I do and runs the business the way I do. Some of these realtors that I don't think are great communicators do fabulously. They have good clientele, they have repeat clientele, they're making a good living. So, who am I to judge? But it's an interesting aspect of communication that I don't believe that there is a right way and a wrong way of communicating. So long as the communication is made and the connection is made, then they're communicating.
Yeah.
Sometimes I just don't understand it, but they're communicating.
Yeah, it sounds again like it's relationship based in a lot of ways.
Very much so. So back to the question of training, no, there was no real training. I know my uncle kept trying to tell me, well, Don, just listen to what they're saying. So listening to what people are saying isn't hearing their words. It's listening to what they're saying. And again, going back to listening between the lines, they'll tell you lots of things, but that's not necessarily what they're saying.
Right. So is there any other advice that you would have for new realtors as far as communication goes?
Get out of the business fast, run. No, seriously. No, there's always room for new realtors in the business, and there's always new realtors coming into the business. Unfortunately, we lose 70 or 80% of them within the first 2 or 3 years because it's not an easy business to succeed at. And listening, taking your time. I guess something I think that I learned a very long time ago was do your job, listen, don't worry about yourself, and the income or the success or whatever you're looking for from the business will show up. It's you don't need that one deal right now. I've always found that whenever my checks come in, I need the money then anyways. So if I don't get it today, I'll get it another day. The most important thing is keeping that customer, that client satisfied, not necessarily bending over for them, but just doing the little things that will keep the stress out of that situation for them. And I think that's probably the most important thing. And when we communicate for the purposes of self-gain, we don't communicate very well. When we communicate to exchange ideas, that's probably a truer form of communication.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. That's great. So if people wanted to find you, Don, and know more about you, where would they go?
Well, as luck would have it, I have a website. Funny you should bring that up. And I'm happy to put it out there. It's www, of course. It's Homes Insight, HOMESINSIGHT, homesinsight.ca. My listings, my information, and a lot of, I think, good information in general on buying and selling a home is on that site. Not everything applies to every individual, but there's a good starting point there. There's the ability to search all the MLS listings from my site. There's contact information there. My email address that I've had for, I'm thinking, what is this? This is 2012 here now, so I've had for at least 20 years, is realservice@tebbutt.com. And real service has sort of been my little tagline or my little motto or my little whatever for many, many, many years. And every once in a while I look at it and I try and remember that real service is more than just a couple of words strung together.
That's great. That's great. Well, and I certainly can corroborate that because Don's been our realtor for a long time now. That's great. Well, thank you so much. I'm going to put all of those links onto the show notes of the website at www.CommunicationDiva.com. So if you're listening to this and you want to go to the page and find the links, they will all be there. And I just want to thank you very much, Don, for taking the time to talk about what it is you do and your business today in this little coffee shop we're sitting in.
Jen, thanks so much for the opportunity. It's been fun. Get to spend a little bit of time with you again because I haven't seen you for a while. There's been lots of changes going on in your life and a few in mine. But I do appreciate the opportunity. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Thanks, everybody. We'll talk to you again soon.